I think it's going to be a very sad tale for Ukraine because Trump has clearly aligned himself with Putin.
Many European leaders will today be wondering just what it is that makes Donald Trump tick. There are lots of good books about Trump if they want to read up on him, but I think the best one is one that was written more than 20 years ago, a lot more than 20 years ago actually. It's called Trumped, and it's the first-hand account of what happened during the Donald's big first foray outside the world of New York property into the casino business in Atlantic City. It's a very vivid first-hand account of what it's like to deal with Trump close up and how to handle him. It was written by Jack O'Donnell, who was former president and chief operating officer of Trump Plaza and Casino. And Jack O'Donnell joins us now. Jack, I'm very pleased to talk to you because I read this book in the 90s, loved it then, and then I reread it recently and loved it again. At the beginning of the book, I think you're quite excited to be going to work for Trump. How long did that feeling last?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Well, first off, thanks for having me today. It's kind of interesting. I was pretty excited to come to work for Donald Trump because he had, he was just this golden boy, particularly on the East Coast. And I had worked for really a pretty dynamic individual before Trump. That was Steve Wynn. And so I was anxious to see, this new mogul, so to speak. And, the first time we met, he strolled into my office. I had already been hired and introduced himself. And I was expecting that we would have, kind of an in-depth conversation, what he wanted me to do with the business and the vision and all the kind of things you would have, when you meet your boss. Instead of that, what he wanted to do is talk about the gossip, what it was like working for Steve Wynn and did he have girlfriends and all this other nonsense. And so the answer to your question is I was quite disappointed. I thought there would be some substance right from the get-go, and there really wasn't.
In reading your book, though, I took some quite interesting things out of it about Donald Trump's character. One of them was that he seems to live entirely in the minute. He doesn't have much of a conception of time and what time might mean, when it comes to business dealings. He's right in the instant.
It's very true. He doesn't see the future. It's all about what's going on today. And what happens then is that creates chaos because he can say something one day, and even if it's a directive, you can go forward with it, and then the next day he doesn't agree with what he said the day before, and will wind up criticizing you and ask you why you did X and so forth. So because of that, in the moment way, it creates chaos in an organization. And quite frankly, in many instances, as I ran the business for 4 years, you wind up ignoring them to some extent because you just have to do what you think is in the best interest of the business, not necessarily what he said one day versus the next day.
Well, I was going to move on to ask, what is the best way to deal with him? If you have this person who lives in the minute, is doesn't remember what he was told yesterday, can you try and manipulate that to your advantage, or might that backfire?
Well, from my perspective, I did try to manipulate in the sense where I would read his mood, so to speak, and sometimes I would even call New York if he was coming down to Atlantic City. I would call his assistant Norma Foderer, who was his right-hand person. And I'd say, hey, what's going on? What kind of mood is he in today? And then I would judge whether I was going to discuss certain subjects. If he was in a bad mood, as an example, I wouldn't discuss any marketing ideas. I wouldn't discuss if we were going to do a commercial, what we were going to do in that, because he would inevitably, if he's in a bad mood, would rather rant and rave, and you wouldn't get anywhere. So I was pretty selective about how I spoke to him about the business, and really kind of read off of his mood in any particular day.
Do you think he's changed? I mean, the Trump you were dealing with back then was kind of Trump 0.0 rather than Trump 1.0 or Trump 2.0. Do you think he's much changed? All those basic facets of his character are the same?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. He hasn't. Even his appearance, he wears the same suits, he wears the same overcoat, same color ties.
He had more
Um,
hair. He had more hair when you were dealing with him.
yeah, he did have a little, which, and he's a little afraid of going bald, obviously. But I'll tell you an interesting story about who he is today versus then. When I finished the book, I pretty much said, I'm done with Donald Trump. Okay. And I didn't talk about him for years and years and years. And then he enters the race in 2016. And I'm getting bombarded by media wanting to talk to me. And I'm saying, no, 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 no. Well, the Washington Post, a particular reporter, was calling me every day for like 2 weeks, just wouldn't take his calls. One day I'm sitting in my office and I get a phone call from Bob Woodward, of all people. And so I can't turn down his call.
No.
He winds up saying to me, Jack, you have to get involved because I've read everything about this man. I've interviewed him multiple times, and he hasn't changed in all these years. Your book is a perfect portrait today as to what it was back in 1991. And so, I would say no. And everything I see publicly and how he operates, that he hasn't changed at all.
Did you vote for him?
Pardon me?
Did you vote for him in the presidential election?
Oh, absolutely not. I am, no. Even if I was a Republican, which I'm not, I just can't, I just couldn't vote for an individual with his character. And I know, what his ambition is in terms of power and control and, and how he approaches things. I just have to say it. He's a bad man. He's not a trustworthy man. And there's no way I could vote for somebody like that, to lead our country.
Because, of course, it's one thing when you're talking about a business book and about what happened in Atlantic City with the casino business. It's a different thing when you're talking about him negotiating with Vladimir Putin over the future of Ukraine.
Yeah, it really is. That's probably the greatest example of Trump, in terms of how he aligns himself and how he goes to the power, and he sees Putin as a very powerful individual, more powerful than anybody in NATO, that's leading a NATO country, and he wants to be around that. He admires people like Putin because he thinks that because he has this control, that's loyalty from his people, and so I think it's personally, and I'm not a politician. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I think it's going to be a very sad tale for Ukraine, because Trump has clearly aligned himself with Putin, and for all practical purposes, it's a surrender.
Thank you very much. Jack O'Donnell, the former president and chief operating officer of Trump Plaza, the casino in Atlantic City. Casinos, it was actually in Atlantic City.